those things will be settled. And, there's a process for the way things go here in Albany, New York, in the capital. And I think that, we're going to find something that, maybe not everyone is happy about. Maybe they're all happy about, but we'll see. We'll see where we end up.
I've also declared war on potholes. So here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a WCNY podcast about power and politics here in New York. And on today's show, we're checking in with State Senator James Skoufis, an Orange County Democrat who, in the wake of the 2024 elections, launched a bid for head of the Democratic National Committee. And while he came up well short of victory, I was interested in why he did it, his future political ambitions in New York, and his take on some of the big political stories in the Empire State. And for full disclosure, I should note that I have a close personal relationship with his chief of staff. And keeping with that theme of radical honesty, I should also note that I forgot to hit record for the first 30 seconds of the senator's first answer, so we'll be picking up kind of midway through his first response. So your bid to run the DNC was met with a lot of skepticism, with my favorite reaction being a professor who told City and State, quote, "It's weird. My assumption has always been that it was about being part of a conversation and raising your profile a la Pete Buttigieg 8 years earlier. But if you did see an actual path to victory, what did that path look like?"
I was running against folks who had been in the DNC, in some cases at a very high level in the DNC for years, if not over a decade. And so my eyes were wide open. I entered the race in part because I felt, and ultimately I did, have a message that was distinct from the other folks who were running. One, I come from a red district. Two, I am not in the camp of Democrats that thinks we should have our head in the sand and not own what happened several months ago on November 5th. I think we have to take significant ownership of what happened and why we lost, and concede that we have to do things very differently. And so that was the message, or the series of messages that I brought. And for a long time, it was a unique message for most of the race. My path to victory, I ran the race working to try and win, despite being a heavy underdog. I hired consultants. I was on call time with DNC members nonstop almost every single day. I did the travel. And so any suggestion, and I understand some people don't follow this type of race very closely, but any suggestion that, just throwing my name out there so I can get some TV hits, we did a lot more than just that. We were working and putting together a real campaign. And the path to victory was, look, I was never going to get the votes of, they're called at-large DNC members. These are a list of 75 members, for example, that they're appointed by the chair or the previous chair, and they're disproportionately consultant types, lobbyists, huge donors, very institutional DNC folks, some of whom have been around for decades and have been reappointed many times. Given my message, given my background, given my lack of relationships, I was never going to get those votes. We were working hard to identify and earn the votes of a few buckets of DNC members. Bucket number one, there are about 30 members of the youth council in the DNC. These are under 36-year-old DNC members, and I was the youngest person running in the race. I'm in my mid-30s myself. And
37 is still mid-30s?
I think 33 to 37 is mid-30s,
okay,
right?
Good to know.
31, 32 is early. 38, 39 is late.
I'll take that.
So I'll certainly take that. So that was one bucket. Another bucket, we were actively pursuing folks who were sort of the reformers within the DNC. These are people who have felt disempowered. These are people who feel as though decisions are preordained, and they want to be relevant within the DNC. They want to share their skills with the party. They feel they're ignored. They feel that structurally the DNC works backwards. And certainly as the outsider in the race, someone who hasn't been part of the DNC, isn't even a DNC member, I was able to lean it very heavily into this reformist message. And then the last bucket, actually the last two buckets, the final one, the fourth one being among the most important, which I'll get to. The third one, DNC members who came from red states and were not just, I'll call it, blindly following the direction vis-a-vis this vote of their state chair. I had great conversations with state chairs. I went out to, it's called the ASDC, which is the association of all the state committee chairs and vice chairs out in Arizona for their big winter meeting before this vote. And I probably sat down with and had conversations with upwards of 50, 60 chairs and vice chairs out of the 100 plus that exist if you count the territories. And nevertheless, though, these are very institutional folks. I could have hit it out of the park in these conversations, but it was always going to be extremely, extremely difficult getting a state chair to throw their lot with someone who is a relative unknown in this field, right? And so we were identifying those red state DNC members who were not necessarily part of the state institutional apparatus. And we were identifying members like that. And then the final fourth bucket was New York. And New York, including the at-large members, had over 20 votes, a significant number in the DNC contest, and we were very aggressively pursuing New York's votes. So a combination of what I just described was our very narrow path to victory. We were pursuing it. We were running the race as if we were trying to win, but with our eyes wide open the entire time as far as the likelihood of success. And I remind you, when you touched on it, success extends beyond just winning or losing on the ballot. There were other ways for this to be a success, and I think we checked a lot of those boxes.
Yeah, that's kind of my follow-up question is, what do you see as the tangible benefit in the aftermath of this? Because, again, bringing it back to Mayor Pete, he made a lot of national contacts, and a lot of the people who he connected with in 2016 then backed him for president in 2020. So what do you see as the tangible benefits of this work?
This is true, and this is perhaps the most unselfish of the reasons, that I mentioned it before. I wanted to move the conversation in the race, and to the extent that there was sort of residual moving of the needle in terms of where we go from here as a party, I feel I did that. And if you examine the 2.5 months or so that I was in the race, it is not a coincidence that the major candidates who were running, and there were primarily 2, 3 if you're being generous, the major candidates in the race, they were slowly but surely adopting, in some cases verbatim, my messaging and certainly platform and sort of issue priorities. Then certainly, now that the race has been over for about a month and a half or so, yes, of course, I met hundreds of Democrats around the country who love the country, love our party, many of whom want to see our party reorient itself, and certainly all of whom want to see our party become successful again. And right now, as you probably know, and many of your listeners probably know, our approval rating as a National Democratic Party hovers somewhere between 21 and 29% within the broader electorate. We've got major problems with the Democratic Party. Now, that said, sometimes we've been losing focus over these last couple of months. The Republican Party is much better off. They're in the 30s. We're in the 20s, but we have a lot of work to do. And so look, I now have this larger network of peers within the party that I stay in touch with, that in some cases I'm creating new partnerships with, and also, and I'll give you, sort of a little bit of a teaser here, in the next, I think, several weeks, there'll be some news as it relates to my role moving forward within the national party. And so look, I'm adamant about staying involved after having gone through this experience, and to the extent that me coming from a Trump plus 12 district can provide a little bit of color and insight and, where possible, reorientation to the party that allows us to best position ourselves to win again, I want to contribute in that way.
It's interesting to hear you talk about a role at the national level. So does that mean you don't have any interest in the state party here in New York, which while it could be viewed as successful given the Democratic majorities in the state Senate, Assembly, the number that you guys have in Congress of the 26 seats, I think there's 19 are blue. Do you have any interest in getting your hands into the state party apparatus, or is that not possible given the fact that it is basically an extension of Governor Kathy Hochul?
If there are ways that I can be helpful to the state party, and the state party needs some help, I want to help the state party. So let me say a couple of things. First, we live in a political world where the outcomes are binary. You win or you lose. And, there's no gray area after, in this past elections case, November 5th. And here in New York, we did a lot more winning than losing. That said, I always caution people when we do look at the win-loss record. The state moved 11 points to the right from 4 years prior. Trump did 11 percentage points net better than he did 4 years prior. And so there are some alarm bells that I think have to go off within our party. Look, we have obviously very important statewide elections next year. We saw how close the gubernatorial was last cycle. And, we have to be very mindful. And I'm talking about this legislatively, from a governing point of view, and then certainly politically as we're discussing the state party. We can't just be seen as reactionary, knee-jerk, we're opposing Trump just to oppose Trump. We have to oppose the bad things that he does, and he's doing a lot of them these days, and articulate why. And then, at the same time, we have to present an affirmative vision for what we stand for as Democrats. And sometimes I think we fall into this trap of just being anti-Trump. Yes, he's around for the next 4 years, but one day Trump is not going to be around. And, we might be able to get through the midterms and take back the House just being anti-Trump. But if we want to create a sustainable Democratic Party that continues to win under any circumstance, then we have to do more than just be anti-Trump. But here in the state, look, one of the benefits I've had from this DNC run is I got to see what a lot of other states do. And you have states like Wisconsin where they have year-round organizers on the ground, and not just a few, over 100 plus organizers on the ground, talking with voters, knocking on doors. It's funded through the state party. That's permanent infrastructure. Here in New York, I dare say we don't have permanent infrastructure. We had a healthy and, it turns out, effective coordinated campaign in some select targeted congressional districts this past cycle. And in terms of that binary outcome I described, it worked. But if we want to begin to turn the tide that has very clearly been turning against us the past, I'd probably say 3 to 4 election cycles, then we have to create a permanent infrastructure. And that requires significant energy and resources and focus beyond just the 6 months leading up to an election.
In addition to the infrastructure question, does there need to be a focus on messaging at the state party level? And do you think Jay Jacobs is the best messenger for whatever the state comes up with?
There should not just be one messenger. I think there's this perception sometimes, whether you're DNC chair, whether you're a state chair, that you are the guy who's the face of the party and the one that every voter sees. The most effective organizations, in my experience, have a deep bench of messengers that can go out to different communities. And some people will be more effective communicating in the North Country than they are in Harlem. That's just, a matter of fact. And so Jay Jacobs, his message, I think is more salient in a Nassau County, a suburb, a mid-Hudson, than it is in some other places of the state. And in those other places, we need to identify and deputize other messengers that can carry our democratic values into those communities effectively. But there has traditionally been a lot of infighting within the New York State Democratic Party, a lot of sniping between, in particular, the ideological camps. That has to end. We have not had a truly big tent in our party since 2008, in my opinion, the first Obama election.
60 U.S. senators since Arlen made
That's
the switch.
right. And ever since then, we've either barely won or lost. And I am not satisfied with those outcomes. And so I think step one to getting back to where we were 16, 17 years ago is to stop the infighting. And that requires the leaders of all the factions, the leaders of our party, and this occurs in other states and nationally as well. We need to understand that we no longer have the luxury, locked out of government in DC, locked increasingly out of state legislatures. We don't have the luxury to infight. And we need to come to terms that we're going to disagree. Of course, we're not going to agree on every issue, but we all have to be respectful of one another's points of view and work towards common goals wherever we can. And I think that narrative is lost in some places, including here in New York State.
And this is Dave chiming in to note that today's episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is made possible by support from New York State United Teachers, National Fuel, the American Heart Association, and the New York State Association on Independent Living. Do you want to be deputized as one of those regional speakers?
If someone wants to deputize me, happy to help. I'm not seeking a deputization. And we've done extremely well in Orange County. You look at, despite the top of the ticket performance in our county, we control the large majority of state legislative seats. We've picked up a lot of municipal seats over the last few cycles in particular. We are running an aggressive county-wide and county ledge campaigns this year. And so it can be done. We used to, at the national level, we used to win in districts like mine. We have stopped winning in districts like mine for a variety of reasons, and we could probably go on for 3 hours about those reasons are. But look, if someone wants to send me somewhere and I could be helpful, God bless, I'm happy to do it.
So on a recent episode of this podcast, we had a fantasy draft, and one of the spots we selected was successor to Tom DiNapoli. So this would be for the 2030 election, maybe 2034, depending on what he sees as his...
2042.
Yeah, I don't know about that
Don't
one.
Don't sell him short.
My thinking was that you would really gravitate toward the audit and oversight functions of the office, as well as the chance to have your own fiefdom. And so I made you my selection for state comptroller. Am I warm at all? Is that appealing to you?
Thanks for drafting me.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you having the confidence in me to do bigger and better things. I'm going to give you a very political answer here. I love Tom DiNapoli. Everyone loves Tom DiNapoli. He does a phenomenal job as comptroller. Do those types of issues appeal to me? Anyone who's followed me in the legislature would know that they do. I talk a lot about ESD, Empire State Development. I talk a lot about IDAs. I talk a lot about tax credits and tax policy. Locally, I lean very heavily into tax policy at the property tax level up to, as I said before, the various deductions and incentives. I working with the conference, spearheaded getting the first audit of our state incentives in as long as people can remember a couple of budgets ago. And so, this issue area has always appealed to me. And look, when Tom DiNapoli moves on, if I'm still here and not doing something completely else, maybe I'll take a look at it. But he's doing a fantastic job, and he has my confidence until he's done.
One of the reasons, though, that I think the legislature gravitated toward him in 2007 was the fact that, one, everybody liked him, and two, I think he was seen as an institutional player. I don't know if both of those things are always true about you, in the sense that, while you have your supporters, you also have your detractors. And two, I think, especially with the way you use your investigations and oversight committee, you have potentially gone after institutions that might otherwise have been ignored in the past. So does that make that type of statewide office a challenge for someone like you, and especially in a primary, if the establishment Democrats are like, we don't want that guy here?
Well, I haven't given it any thought, and so I don't know if it proves to be a challenge. Look, I have a style that I bring to this job, and as you pointed out, some people appreciate the style, and some people don't appreciate the style. But, I have found that average voters find it refreshing that not every word that comes out of my mouth is focus grouped to death and is run through 19 different consultants. And so I'm going to continue with sort of how I approach this job, and that is being someone who doesn't yes folks to death, tells it how it is, and really tries to lean into those issues that matter most to voters. If it proves to be someday I want to do something else and it proves to be a challenge, so be it. I will say one of the golden rules, at least to the politics that I adhere to, is I don't run for things that I can't win. There has to be at least some path. And so if someday there's some opportunity that lends itself, that then proves itself to be an impossibility because of, how I operate in the state legislature, the enemies that I have, then I won't run. It's as simple as that. And my life will be just fine. In my job interview every 2 years that I have in a red district, mind you, if people think I'm not doing a sufficient enough job, they can kick me out of the Senate. And I'm fine. I'll land on my feet. I'll probably make a lot more money doing something else. The prospect of not being an elected official, and in many cases when you are concerned about every election and not being employed on the public payroll, you sometimes have a tendency to be too calculating. And voters, look, it's one of the reasons why Donald Trump won. A lot of folks who voted for him know he's a liar. A lot of folks who voted for him know he's a bad human being and someone who is going to create instability. But they also, right or wrong, and I happen to think they're wrong, but a lot of people feel that he's not a typical politician. He's not someone, again, that is running every word through 19 different consultants. He was in Las Vegas, and then I'll shut up and let you ask your next question. He was in Las Vegas right after the election doing a no taxes on tips rally. And he did his rally, and you know what the front page of the New York Times was, the big photo that was included in the reporting of that rally? It wasn't a photo at the rally. After the rally, this was unscheduled, he walked into the casino next door and started playing craps with just random gamblers. That was the photo on the front page of the New York Times. Donald Trump at a craps table with just people he had run into, and voters are craving that authenticity, that normalcy. There aren't a lot of national Democrats who could do what I just described and pull it off. But he did. That's the difference.
Well, here in New York, the type of person that I imagine would be comfortable in that sort of freewheeling, ad-libbed setting is someone like Assemblymember Zoran Mamdani, who has made a lot of connections on social media and with real people as part of his mayoral campaign. I imagine there is a wide chasm, though, that separates you and him on your political beliefs. But what do you think about him and his messaging, and if any of that is replicable, or whether the Democrats should be trying to replicate it?
There are a lot of lessons to be learned from his campaign. And let me start by saying, not that I have a vote in the contest, but I'm a strong supporter of Senator Zohran Mamdani in that race. I think he is exceptionally qualified to be mayor.
Had a fundraiser for him.
I had a fundraiser for him. There are a lot of lessons to be learned, though, from Zoran's campaign. I think he's run an impressive, strictly from an electoral standpoint, an impressive campaign, really sharp messaging. His digital, his social media presence is unique in the race and extremely creative. And he's incorporated humor into a lot of his messaging, which, again, normalizes him for a lot of voters and makes it seem as though he's authentic. Look,
Makes it seem as though, or is he authentic?
Well, you have to ask him.
Okay.
I don't really know Zoran.
Gotcha.
I've had a couple of brief conversations with him over the years as a colleague in the legislature. But he's run a strong campaign, and he's gone from a complete unknown to someone who's registering in some polls. I think I've seen him as high as 15-18%. So we would be smart as a party to bring in creatives like those that are helping run his campaign. Again, I am a subscriber. I'm center left. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a DSA person. I'm not a far lefty. I'm a center left Democrat. But I would be the first to tell you that I want those folks in my big tent as a party. That's the only way we're going to start winning again. And a lot of those folks are creatively inclined and talented and bring a different sort of perspective to campaigning than, some stodgy guys who maybe have been an operative for the past 30, 40, 50 years. No matter how the race shakes out, we want talent like that in our party. Now, I will say that I'm very concerned because, just strictly politically speaking, New York City is at a crisis, I think, inflective moment and requires steady, intelligent, and competent leadership. But politically speaking, New York City has been a national liability for Democrats. So has Chicago. So has LA. These big cities have become punching bags for Republicans and have been weaponized. What's going on or not going on in these cities has been weaponized against the broader Democratic Party. One of the things that we have to really focus on is in these big cities that have a high national profile, we have to learn how to govern better in these cities. And that's why I support someone like Zelnor Myrie. I hope that once we turn the page on Eric Adams, we can have a city that is no longer a liability, but a city that we can actually point to as a success within our Democratic Party.
You mentioned earlier that you're only going to run for something if you see a viable pathway to winning. So with that as the backdrop, do you see any viable pathway for running for governor in 2026? And if not, who are you backing for governor in 2026?
I'm not interested. I'll say it here, and I'll be unequivocal. I am not interested in running for governor in 2026. I'm not backing anyone at this point. I think it's fair to say.
What if someone asked for your endorsement? What if Antonio Delgado called you up? He said, Senator Skoufis, it's me, Antonio Delgado. I used to have an office somewhere near here. Who knows what I got now? You want to support me?
No one's asking for my endorsement in March of 2025. And I will say this.
Senator Skoufis, it's me, Kathy Hochul. Will you come support me?
Let me say this.
Okay.
I think there are a number of people on both sides of the aisle that everyone thinks are running for governor that will not be running for governor come next year.
Is one of those a Hudson Valley Republican?
And let me finish
Okay.
what I'm about to say on this thought. Anyone who is even remotely interested in running for governor would be doing what someone like Mike Lawler and Richie Torres are doing. And that is making it seem like they're running for governor. Because what's the worst that can happen? They're going to spend the next 10 months getting a ton of publicity, meeting new donors, and raising their profile, and getting lots of press attention. And you know what they're going to do in 8 to 10 months from now? They're going to run a poll. And if the poll shows them that they can't win, they're not going to run. And I am willing to bet that at least some of the names that are out there that are making it seem like they're running for governor will get a poll back that demonstrates to them they can't win, and they won't run. And so, I know that everyone is sort of playing this parlor game around the governor's race next year. And I just sort of caution people because, it's a largely academic conversation at this point because I don't think some of these people are running.
Especially if they have a backup day job, which
that too.
Torres and Lawler do. But no one really knows what Delgado's going to be doing.
Well, he's not going to be lieutenant governor.
Right. So do you think he has a pathway as you look at the field? Is there a bank shot to Triple Lundy that he could potentially pull off, or is he wasting his time and the consultants that he's paying?
It is impossible to predict where the political world is going to be here in New York or anywhere a year plus from now. It's an eternity. And Donald Trump being in office, strictly politically speaking, is advantageous for Governor Hochul. It presents her with endless opportunities to create foils.
It's 2018 Cuomo.
2018 Cuomo. That's right. And so, look, her numbers are where they are right now. They're underwater with general election voters. They're not underwater with primary voters, although they're not strong. There's a world that's, I think, reasonable where, especially with Democrats in a potential primary, that, her numbers could be a lot stronger a year from now than they are today, or not. And so, is there a bank shot? Is there some universe? Of course there is, because the world today, which, her numbers are what they are today, I don't think, if the election were tomorrow, there'd be some certainty that she would win election. I think that's fair to say, even if you asked her and her team, that there's not a certainty that she's going to win a primary or a general election. But a year from now, the world could look very, very differently. And so even if you've got small to no chance now, Antonio Delgado, or insert whatever name, you might in a year, or you might not. Who knows? So look, I don't know how this shakes out. Certainly the dynamics are going to be different. Donald Trump, look, he had a honeymoon for about 2 seconds after he took office. And his version of a honeymoon, by the way, is a 50% approval rating. Most other people's version of a honeymoon is a 65% approval rating. And, his numbers are dropping about as fast as Tesla stock these days. And I suspect 6 months from now, 9 months from now, he'll be probably hovering in the high 30s, low 40s approval rating, which is where he spent most of his time when he was in office during his first term. That helps Democratic incumbents. Now, I will say there is this undercurrent that I believe exists and is growing today that did not exist at the start of Trump's first term. And I think whatever the parallel is on the Democratic side to the Tea Party, there's something brewing there where there's a lot of animus from the base towards some in the Democratic Party who feel that elected Dems are not doing enough to resist Trump. Certainly you saw the outrage over Senator Schumer's vote from a couple of weeks ago.
Do you think that outrage was misplaced?
Yeah, I would not characterize it as misplaced because Democrats should be angry right now. And I'm angry right now with what's going on in the federal government. And I do think that our national elected officials and party, we're the opposition party. We literally don't control any lever of government in Washington, D.C. If we're not going to be an opposition party, we might as well fold up our tent because we can't do anything else. And, there is a systematic upheaval, putting it kindly, that is transpiring in our national government right now. And Democrats and a lot of non-Democrats expect our national Democrats to be taking every advantage, every opportunity we can to slow down or stop what's going on. And those opportunities are rare because of the dynamics that exist. And so I fully understand why people were angry.
Well, we've been speaking with State Senator Jim Skoufis. He's an Orange County Democrat. Senator, thanks for visiting us in the studio.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.